So hello, welcome to the next video in my series of model hints, tips and cheats. Today I'm going to talk about brushes. Now, little bit of a disclaimer before I begin. The subject of brushes is possibly one of the most opinion filled areas in hobbying. Now what I mean by that is what I regard as the best brush you may not agree with, and what I regard as the worst brush, again, you may not agree with. However, one thing that I do believe is true, the best brushes are amongst the best. So you may not think my favourite brush is your favourite, but you'll agree it's a good one, and vice versa. But again, like I say, it is very opinion filled. But one thing I will say about brushes is go for the best brush that you feel is the best. A good example of this is there's some very good brushes out there on the market, extremely expensive. I found a cheaper alternative which I think are as good, so I will never go out and spend massive amount of money on brushes because I found the best that I can. Anyway, I've probably confused you all now, so let's confuse you more by showing you the brushes. Okay, so I have in front of me a selection of brushes, possibly quite confusing, but this is a selection of the brushes that I use on a regular basis. I own a lot more than these brushes, but I have different sizes and different types. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to break down the anatomy of a brush so we know what components are what. And to do that, I'm going to use this one, and I'm using this one because it has a very nice long tip. So the components that are, this is the same for every single brush, and what we have at the end here is a handle. Now obviously the handle is there to hold it. You've got different size handles like this one. This is probably your most common handle shape, and obviously the size of the handle can vary. This is a much bigger one, mainly because it's got fatter bristles. And as you see, this one I've got here, it's got a massive handle, because obviously if you had a handle this big with this size bristles, it just wouldn't work. But this is the most common shape you'll find. Sometimes you come across these nice triangular brushes with a little handle on the end like this. And I think these are absolutely wonderful for two reasons. One is that you see this one, that will roll off the table quite easily. This one being triangular, it doesn't roll so much. And this one takes it a step further. It's got a proper little grip for it. So if maybe perhaps you've got problems with your joints, this is a very good brush to have. However, if you find this end, the bristles, you're really happy with, but it comes in a handle this shape, there isn't normally a lot you can do. You can put bits of foam on the end, put a bit of tape around and some foam, make it easier. So I'm not too bothered about the handle, because if I want to make the handle that shape, you know, there's ways and means to do it. But this is the handle, and this is basically, you've got three main components. You've got the handle there, and then on the other end you've got the bristles. Now the bristles is the business end, and this is the bristles from there. In the middle you have what's called the ferrule, usually metal, and it consists of two ends. You've got the crimp there, so called because it's crimped, and you'll usually find they're always crimped. There is a couple of, well, there's not usually no exceptions, but you see there that all of these have a metal bit in the end, and you have it crimped onto the the handle, which is usually wooden, there, and then you've got the bristles come out the other end there. So that's the main component. And the reason I'm using this big brush is to show you easier. So you have the bristles on the end. Now the bristles are generally split into 3 areas, descriptive wise. So you have on the end, which is this piece there, this is called the toe. Can I get a focus please? Right, so you've got the toe on the end, and the toe is generally what you're using to paint with. Okay, then you've got on this in the middle is the belly, and the belly is usually where you will load the paint up to, and then you've got the heel, and the heel for me is like a no man's land. You don't want to get paint in the heel, because what happens is the paint gets up there, it's hard to clean, it dries, and then it forces the bristles apart, and then you end up with a terrible brush that's that shape rather than that shape. And that's basically the components. So you've got the handle, you've got the ferrule, you've got the bristles. The bristles are split into 3. You've got the heel, the belly, and the toe. So let me show you, let's get some paint out, and then I will show you a little bit more what I mean about the heel, the belly, and the toe. Okay, so what I have here, the colour doesn't matter for what I'm doing, but I've got a little bit of paint on a palette, and what I've done is I've just thinned it down a little bit like we always do. And what I've done is I've loaded my paintbrush up. Now what you may notice is when I load my paint up, I give a little twist on the brush like so, and that is to just bring those bristles together to a nice point. And you'll see that I've got paint on the brush about 2/3 up, and I've got paint, basically I've got paint in the toe and the belly, but you see at the top where the heel is, there's no paint, and you never load paint up there. So what we do is we load our paint up, and then we give it a little twist, and then what we want to do before we start painting, just want to knock just a little tiny off the end, like tiny bit off the end, and that gives us a nice paint surface. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to paint with the toe. Now if you've got your paint nice and thin and it flows nicely, the paint will naturally flow from the belly to the toe, and then we paint with the toe, and we have all the control. I think this paint is a little bit too thick to paint onto paper, but that's generally, I missed that completely. So let me thin this a little bit more. Obviously the amount that you thin is based on the surface, the paint, what you want to achieve. So I'll just get that a little bit thinner. Now this particular brush that I'm using is a synthetic brush, which I'll go into in a moment. There we go, that's a lot better. For what we're painting, it's probably perfect. So there we go. So I've loaded my paint up, and you see I've used about 2/3 of the brush. I've given my little twist at the end, and then I've just knocked the end off just to stop any surprises as we paint. And then we paint with the toe like so, and we keep that nice control. If you go straight in and you use the whole brush, can you see that you've got an absolute mess there? You lose control as you go around corners. The thickness of the line changes because we're using the side of the brush. So basically the belly is a no-go area when it comes to painting. So let's load that up again. So we'll show you again. We'll knock the end off. So you see that I've just knocked a little bit off, not much, just enough to give us, so that when we come in, can you see how we get a nice start to that line? So if we don't knock that end off, sometimes we don't quite have the control to start with. You see that the line is But so just by knocking that end off, we have that control. So if we paint with the belly, can you see that what we end up with is lines of different thickness and different consistency, whereas if we paint with the toe, it doesn't matter what direction we go in, we have that consistency. Now, I've deliberately done something wrong, but I still managed to get a fairly decent result, and that's that we paint in 3 directions. So we can paint, the best way to paint is to draw the brush backwards. Can you see I've got a nice control line there? We can go left, we can go right, but the best way to paint is to pull the paint. We're always painting towards the handle. As I say, you can go that way, and there's some techniques where you need to go sideways, but one direction that you should never ever paint in is forwards, because what you're trying to do is then push the bristles backwards, and you'll just end up with a few problems. I mean, you say with a good brush you can get away with it, because my paint is nicely thinned, it's a good brush, I can get away with it, but generally pulling the brush backwards. Like I say, there's some techniques you paint sideways, you can go up, well, left or right in relation to the brush, but can you see that I have lost a little bit of control there by going sideways? So generally by pulling downwards you get the best, you achieve the best results. Right, so let me stop, clean my brush, and then what we'll do is we'll talk about the different types of brushes. Okay, so for the work that I do with brushes, the most common kind of brush that you'll come across is something like this. If I can get a focus, right. So as you see, it's just a basic bristles on the end, just a normal, what I would call paintbrush shaped. And you can see it's got the whole bristles. It's just an ordinary shape, and this is for your general painting. Now you can get other shapes, such as this one. This is a fan brush, and fan brushes are very good for doing things like washes or inks, where you want to just spread a little bit of the ink over a larger area. You can see that to do my whole hand I can do that in about 3 swoops, whereas with a brush, can you see how much extra time that would take to cover? And obviously the less I say the word swoops, each bit that you do, you've got a bit more control over it. The more times that you're doing a line, the more overlap you have, the more uneven it can get. So something like this will give a nice good coverage of ink or wash or something. The next thing I use quite a bit are these flat brushes, and I like the flat brushes because if I'm painting a large area and I need to paint with with brushes, I can get nice even coverage. It just covers a little bit more. We don't need the thickness, so we need the coverage. So we've got the width, and that just helps cover. Sometimes I'm doing a little bit of an odd job. I personally find that these brushes here, this one is called a saw brush. You see it's got uneven edges, and I actually find these very useful for applying decals. I know that's not the correct job for it, but that's something that I find quite useful. It's got 5 fingers, and it's just like pushing something in, and I can manipulate just a little bit easier. I just say I know that's improper use, But yeah, that's something I like. Now you've got some brushes that have longer bristles, and these are called liner brushes. And what that means is that you can do a nice line. If you're getting into something that's detailed, let's say I was going to paint this and I want to pop a line into, there's a little recess in there, so I could paint a line. I can just get the bristles in there, and it just helps. Can you see that I can, the actual toe is in the detail, but the belly is actually not making contact. Whereas if I used an ordinary brush such as this, can you see that I've got the belly and the toe is in the recesses, so you might run the risk of putting a little bit too much paint in there. So by having a longer brush, you can just pop the toe in, and then what's happening is the paint is flowing from the belly to the toe. As the paint comes out of the toe, it's being replenished. Think of the belly as a paint reservoir, and it's feeding the toe. So can you see it's going to be loading that up like so. And then the other brush that I have, I believe these are called rounds, and these are just a big fat brush, and I tend to use these for dry brushing. I want to just get lots of coverage in different directions, so I want it round so that whatever direction I'm hitting with the same thickness. And that's basically the main brushes that I use. So you've got a fan brush, you've got a normal, I'm just going to call this a normal brush, what we come to know as a normal paintbrush. This is quite a good shape actually. Okay, and we've got a flat brush. This is called a filbert. I'll be honest with you, I don't know much about filberts, but I think this is more for direction. But flat brush, round brush, and fan brushes, that's the ones that I tend to use the most. Another brush I want to give a little bit of a special mention to are these kiddie brushes. They are absolutely useless for painting. I will never paint with these. These have got these big heavy plastic bristles, but I find them very good for doing, should we call it the grunt work? Things like mixing paints. You've got paint in an airbrush, or you want to clean things out. I find these extremely useful. Although this is a video about paintbrushes, not about airbrushes, this is a brush, and I just want to say that these are not totally useless. You tend to find in the model world that you make use of a lot of things. Let me show you something else. These are makeup brushes, and I cannot remember. I want to buy more if I can just remember where I got them from. To be perfectly honest with you, this brush I tend to use more as a cleaning brush. It's very good for getting dust out of things. If you've had a model sitting on your desk for a while, such as this, and you just want to get some of the dust, it's big enough to clean the dust off, but it's such sharp. Like you see that I've got an antenna there. Now I can brush that because the bristles are very, very soft, but it gets in all those nooks and crannies, and it gets all the dust off. But these, for me, let me just put that back on. The real magic comes in these brushes. Now I do use these a lot for dry brushing, and I'll tend to use these on rougher things. If you want a little bit smaller detail, these makeup brushes are absolutely amazing for dry brushing. If you ever need to add a little bit of subtle detail to the raised panel edges, raised edges, especially models where you've got lots and lots of detail. Let me show you this. Can you see that there's an extreme amount of detail on this model? So you might want to do some, like down there where the rocks are, you want to do some really nice dry brushing. And I find these are absolutely amazing. They're very soft, and I don't understand the science of them, but they seem to hold so much paint, but they release it very, very gently. So what you can do is you can find something to dry brush, and you will be there for ages until it completely runs out of paint. See all this detail we could dry brush. Obviously I've got no paint on here, so I'm not dry brushing it, but I'm just showing you. But this brush will go on forever and ever. So next I want to talk about bristle types, and then we'll talk about cleaning the brushes. Okay, so different brushes are made from different materials, and each material has its value based on its cost and what it does. Now these, I have no idea what they're made of. I think they're made of soft, cute puppy fur or something like that. I don't know, but they're very, very soft. But that's that. So the main brush that you will find that you will use on a day-to-day basis, these are the cheap ordinary brushes. You will either be a synthetic nylon, or it will be a sable. Now sable, I'm gonna destroy everybody's what am I going to destroy? Basically I'm going to make everybody sad now. Sable is a squirrel-like creature, and we make brushes out of the hairs on their tail, but sable makes a wonderful brush. So this is a sable head brush, and it's a really good brush because of its spring. So as you paint with it, it will normally always revert back to its original shape. I'm trying to keep that focused, but I just cannot. Now if you stored your brush like this, it will stay that shape eventually. You will kind of just bend it, but as you can see, that it's just kind of lost its shape a little bit. But once it's wet, I tend to find these go to a really nice point. Okay, now a brush that I think is even nicer, and we are now talking more expense, is a brush that I cannot find. It's this one, it's not that one. Oh, where's my brush gone? I'm looking for a brush with a white bit. Right, here we go. So this brush, and you can't really see the difference, but you'll certainly feel the difference, and this is Kolinsky sable. So this is like, for me it's, come on, this is the aristocrat of the sable world. It's a really nice brush. It's a little bit softer, it's a little bit springier, and it flows better, and it's just absolutely beautiful to paint with. So something like this, a sable brush, I will tend to paint large area, paint the main bit, maybe do base coats, but if I want a nice smooth top coat, I'll perhaps use this one. And this is, let's say, this is Kolinsky sable. Now this is on a par with the very expensive Winsor & Newton brushes, which are about £15 a brush. But this is made by a company called Rosemary & Co. And you can find them on the internet by searching Rosemary & Co. This particular one is a series 83 Kolinsky sable. This one is a series 98, and I find their service absolutely brilliant. I will say I'm not being paid to say this. This is my pure opinion. But at £10 saving a brush, I think they're worth mentioning. Now another brush that I'm starting to use, I'm quite new to these, is these red spotters. Spotter red dot. I think it's an artificial synthetic brush, but it's quite tough and quite durable and extremely good for oil paint. So where you want to be putting oils on and then you want to be spreading that around, that's a very, very good brush. Now you've got these are Daleroni brushes, and they must be synthetic because of the price, but these are very good again for oil brushes, oil work, and they're quite tough and durable, and again very good for oil work. The next one I've got is these, and these are hog hair. These are Rosemary & Co series 3077. As you see, they feel very basic, they don't feel very nice, but they're extremely hard wearing. They're hog hair, they're thick, and that makes them extremely good for dry brushing. Dry brushing is a technique. I did it a little bit earlier. I was doing this, and as a result it absolutely destroys brushes. What I find with these, the way they wear out when you're dry brushing, is it takes a little tiny bit off the end. So what happens is they get shorter. They don't just they just kind of get shorter, and they do last a very, very long time. So there is one more brush that I want to show you, and I've forgotten which one it is. Here it is. It's the squirrel hair. Now the reason I buy squirrel hair, is it this one? Yes. Excuse me. Now I've talked about wash brushes, and I've mentioned this fan brush, and this is a very good for washers. But this is another one that's very, very good for washers. It's a very soft brush, and it's very easy to lose control of it. It's a little bit like my hair when I wash it in the morning. It just goes all frizzy and horrible, and then it just takes a little while to control. I wouldn't paint with these. These are I think these are watercolor brushes, but what they do is they hold a tremendous amount of wash. Again, using your belly and your toe properly, they will hold an awful lot of wash in the belly, and then you're washing with the toe. You see where I've been painting with that, and it's kind of giving it a little bit of a shape. And where I've been applying wash with it, this will go on forever. So that's basically the main materials. So the next thing we want to look at is cleaning our brushes. Okay, so let me just move my camera so we can just see a little bit more. So we've been doing a bit of painting. Let's find our ordinary brush. We've done a bit of painting. We need to get rid of the paint. So the very, very simple way to clean a brush, because we're using, obviously if you're using something that's not water based such as oils, there's going to be a slightly different technique, but this is how I deal with acrylics. So you got your brush. Obviously I haven't got paint on there, but the principle is the same. So all I need to do is just rinse my brush. Now this particular paint pot, it has little knobs at the bottom, little dimples, and what you can do is just run your paint through, and you put your whole brush in. Now what's very, very important is that you're going to dry that top bit where the crimp is. You don't really want to get paint into there. Ideally you may not even actually want to wash any further than the ferrule. And then what I then do is I'll just, with a cloth, I'll just pull the brush from the top to the bottom through a piece of paper. Make sure you've got paper that doesn't leak. Don't use toilet paper, because that will leave little bits behind and it all gets stuck in the bristles. And then just keep doing that until you've got all the paint off, and then just pull that. I get 3 fingers, place it around the brush and twisting the brush around, and that just dries that to a nice point. Now that's what I call a basic clean, and that applies when I'm changing colours. Now if your colour is going to clash in some way, you need to make sure that gets a good clean. So for example, if I want to paint red and then straight after red I want to paint white, there's always a risk that you don't get every single bit of paint out. And if you add, anyone who's painted this before will know that if you apply just one tiny bit of red to white, you will not end up with a white. So obviously you need to give it a more thorough clean. So what I do is either using my paint thinners that I've made or even my paint cleaner, I'll get a little pot and I'll just put a little bit of thinner into the pot, and then what I can do is just run my bristles into there, and if that brush is not clean, it will change colour. That's actually a clean brush, so that's okay. And then I can do the same like that, and then that brush is ready to go. So now the third way of cleaning it, and this is more of what I call a storage clean. You need to get some kind of brush cleaner. Now this is, in my opinion, the best brush cleaner you can get. This is called the Masters Brush Cleaner and Preserver. It doesn't seem to be sold generally in the UK. It's very much an American product, but you can buy it on Amazon, and it's basically a soap. Now if you can't get a hold of this, you could use Fairy Liquid. Sorry, I used a brand there. Washing up liquid, and the principle is the same. So what you want to do is just dampen your brush, dampen not wet, and then just run your brush in there. And then what we want to do is, in the same way that we did before, 3-finger method, just work our brush, the lather in there, and we can apply as much as we want. Now what you can do is you can actually apply quite a bit if you want to give it a good deep clean. Pick up just a little bit of surface, and then you can work it into a lather in the palm of your hand, and that gets, what that does is it gets right up into the heel. And in a lot of cases, some cases, not necessarily all, that will actually remove any paint that's got caught in the heel. So you might think you've got a ruined brush, but in actual fact this will restore it. It's what's called a brush restorer. Now you'll see there's a lot of black coming off that. That's actually from where I've been putting dirty brushes in. Sometimes I get a little bit OCD and I might just clean the soap like that. But generally the soap doesn't necessarily need to be clean. You need to finish it, you need to rinse it off. Okay, so once I've rinsed that brush off, and I think there you can see a visible difference already in the way that the bristles come to a point. And then what I often do, maybe once a fortnight, once a month, I don't know if you've noticed, but when you buy a brand new brush, it has all this gunk on it. This one not so much. I haven't got any brushes that I've not used before, but sometimes they come with this coating, so it keeps the bristles nice in transit. I actually recreate that with the brush soap, and what I do is I'll just give that a little coating, and there, I'll leave it like that, and then that will dry and it will give it a little protective coating. But obviously if you've done that, you've got to make sure you clean your bristles before you use your brush. But there you go, that's a nice clean brush. Okay, and that's but generally what I'll do is, as you see, this is the paint water I've used from the last session of painting, and when I start a new session painting, I'll start off with clean water. Don't know if you can see, but I've actually used metallic paint before. One thing I wanted to say as well actually is, when you have paint water, if you can, have two kinds of paint water, one that you use for ordinary paints and one that you use for metallic paints. metallic paints contain little metallic flakes, and as you put your brush in there you can pick up the odd metallic flake, so you could end up with a little bit uneven if you're doing a nice white. To be honest with you, when I'm doing whites I always clean my brush in clean water anyway, because you've only got to pick up, let me look at the colour of that water, it's absolutely gross. Right guys, so I hope that that's given you good basic introduction to brushes and how to clean them. It's really not a hard job cleaning them, but if you don't clean them properly you will run into problems. There's different types of brushes, there's different shapes of brushes, and what you'll tend to find is you'll end up doing what you feel best with. You know, I have found with my Kolinsky sable brushes, because they come to a really good fine point, if say for example you have a job that you need, oh sorry, that's something else I forgot to mention. Now you will see a number on all of the brushes, and that refers to a size. So this, for example, if I can ever get it to focus, is a size 2, and the Kolinsky sable one you can't see is a size 0. This is a size 2. I generally tend to find a size 2 tend to be the most common. This is a size 8. This is a size 0, and so on and so forth. So what happens is, starting at size 0, the bigger the brush, the bigger the number. So it will go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think the largest brush that I own is this size 18 hog hair bristle. This is very, very good for doing large rocks, but that's a size 18. Now, a word of warning with the size numbers. There you go, size 8. There is no set convention. Sorry, I need to finish off a size number. So yeah, we've gone from 0 upwards. Now when it gets smaller, instead of going 0, -1, -2, they add zeros. But what they do is they, instead of putting 00000, they put a number and a stroke. So for example, let's see if I've got any. I know I do own some. Here we go. So this one is a size 30, and what that means is it's size 000. So as you go from 0 smaller, you've got 0, then you've got smaller than that is 00, smaller than that is 000, and then it goes 0000. But instead of having a paintbrush with 20 zeros written on it, they just change the number. So 30 actually means 000. Somewhere I've got a 10 0, so that actually means 00000000000. So they write it as 10 0. So sorry, the next bit I was going to say was there is no convention on what size 0. I'll use 0 as a standard. Most of us, you'll probably find as a paintbrusher, as a model maker, you will use a size 2 as a standard brush. If you only own one brush, I would say get a size 2. That's generally, this is actually a squirrel hair one, but for size wise it proves the point. So that's a good general purpose brush. If you get a good brush, you can use this in place of lots of other things, but if you only have, like for example, if you bought an Airfix starter kit, that will generally come with maybe a size 2, because as you can see from the size of those bristles, that's a good standard. It's not too big that you can't get into the small detail, and yes, you could do with a larger one for doing things like wings, but it's a good compromise between all brushes. So I will get this next bit out. There is no convention on what size 0 is, but what you will find is that within the same manufacturer and the same series of brush, a 1 will always be bigger than a 0, and a 2 will always be bigger than a 0 or 3 0. But as I say, there is no standard on what 0 is. So these are both 0s, and you'll see they look roughly the same size, and I think that that's because it's made by the same company. Now let's see if I can find, here we go. Right, so where's me Rosemary & Co size 2? Here we go. So these are all size 2 brushes. Now, depending on what kind of measurements you want to use, I would suggest that the longer orange one on the left is a little bit bigger than the one in the middle. I would say possibly that one in the middle is slightly smaller. Now these are all the same size brushes. Now this one is made by Expo Tools. This is the smallest one, and this biggest one is made by De La Roni, and that's a size 2 liner, and the one in the middle is a squirrel hair made by Rosemary & Co, and it may just be an optical illusion, but you could find some cheap brushes, and I think it's possibly the same with clothing sizes. If you go with an expensive brand, you may find that a particular size is larger cut, whereas a cheaper brand, they're a little bit stingier with their material, so it's a little bit of a tighter cut. And what you tend to find, it's actually a trick, because what you do is if you go with a cheaper brand, you end up having to buy a larger size, so you don't feel so good about yourself. If you go to an expensive brand, because they're slightly more generously cut, you'll find that you'll buy a smaller size and you'll go, oh wonderful, I've lost weight, I can get into a smaller dress size, and now you feel good, so you go back to that shop more often. But that goes off the subject a bit. Right guys, so I hope I've covered everything to do with brushes. I've covered the areas, which is the handle, the ferrule, you've got the crimp, you've got the heel, which is a no-go area for paint, you've got the belly, which effectively acts as a paint holder, and then you've got the toe, which is your painting area. So you've got all this bristle, but you're only really using this bit, and then by using that end bit, you've got a lot more control. You've got different shapes of bristles which do different jobs. You see this is much longer in proportion to the width of the brush. This is more of a general brush, and then we've got different sizes. So you see this is a slightly smaller brush than what I would call standard, and this is possibly for a little bit better detail. This is a good all-round brush. You know, I say if you're just starting in model making, I would go for this brush. This brush will cover just about everything. It'll take you longer. Let me just find this wing here. You can see that if I want to paint this entire wing, it will take me a lot longer than if I used, for example, this brush. But obviously you find that over time you buy brushes, and obviously paint brushes will wear out, so what I would perhaps look at doing is buying something like this as my very first paintbrush, maybe get 6 months use out of it, maybe a year if I'm very lucky, and then I would perhaps be looking at buying something like this. Now this brush will cost you maybe 2 or 3 times as much as this brush, but this brush will probably last you 10 times longer if you look after it. I'm not going to, but if I didn't look after this brush, This brush will probably be dead within about half the time of this cheap brush. So it's all about looking after them. So I've shown you how I clean my brushes. 3 kinds of way of cleaning brushes. One is a very basic clean, which is basically a swoosh with water. It gets the paint off. If you're painting lots of similar colours, for example, if you're doing lots of greens and browns, very drab greens and browns for camouflage, that is an absolutely perfect way to paint the brush. You know, especially if you're doing different tones, where you don't need your paint to be absolutely spot on. It's lots of, you know, shades. Maybe perhaps you're blending your paints together. So going back to this, which is something I picked up randomly, if I'm doing highlights on top of this, it's not absolutely critical that I clean my brush absolutely perfectly, because I'm doing a dark blue, then I'm doing a medium blue, then a light blue, so it's all within the blue spectrum. If you need to clean your brushes perfectly, I recommend using something like thinners or cleaners, and I've shown you in a previous video how I make my own cleaners, and that gives them a really good clean. It's designed to mix with the paint and thin it, or actually clean it, and then taking care of your brush afterwards. Something like this Masters brush cleaner and preserver. As I say, this is extremely expensive. It's about, I think it's about £15–20 for that small bottle, but I have been using this now for about 5 or 10 years, and as you can see, you know, it's up to about there. So I use it a lot, and it's basically it's a bar of soap, but obviously it's specially made for paint. So if you can't get any Masters brush cleaner, or you haven't got the funds to get it yet, you know, maybe get yourself a bar of soap, something cheap from Poundland, or washing up liquid. But this really is a good product to use, and this actually does oil paint, watercolors and acrylics, and it's got lots of different languages on, so I can't read them all. But yeah, the instructions, it just says rinse brush in warm water, swirl brush in compound and work into lather, rinse and repeat as necessary until brush is clean, rinse thoroughly. For hard oil paint brushes, repeat above process as often as necessary. Let brush set with cleaner on bristles for a short period. Resume process until brush is clean. Leave clear lather on brushes to shape and condition brushes. So this is why every couple of weeks when I get my brush, I'll put a little bit of the brush cleaner on, and I'll leave it on. I don't know if that's an established technique, but it's something that I've been doing, and it's just basically, I call it a factory reset. When you buy brushes, they have this kind of factory gunk on them, and it's there just to help keep the shape while it's in transport. So they always say when you buy a brush, the very first thing you need to do is give it a good clean, just to get rid of that gunk on the end. So this is me putting that gunk back on. Right, I'm just trying to change my camera. Front view camera. Right guys, so I hope you found that useful. As you can see, it's not quite as much to a brush as just picking it up and getting on with it. Now, I will say that there are many different more types of brush, and there's lots of different terms that I could throw at you. We've got riggers, we've got filberts, we've got swords, we've got angles, but this is an introduction to paint brushes. So I thought I would tell you all about the brushes that you will use most commonly, as either I regard myself as a scale model aircraft maker and figure painter, so these are the brushes that I will use more often. If I was a canvas artist, this video would be completely different. I would probably be having a much more of a slant on oils. One thing I forgot to say, obviously, if you're using oil paints, then obviously you won't be cleaning your brushes in water. Instead, I would go straight to the little pot of, but instead of using cleaners, I'd be using white spirits. But I think, you know, if you're using oil paints, you would understand that you don't use water. So really, perhaps what I should have said, instead of putting your homemade cleaner in, maybe I should have used the words, put in a substance that would be suitable to clean the type of paint you've got. Right guys, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. So next week I'm actually going to be painting something. So I'm going to show you a very basic introduction to painting. We'll do a couple of types of painting. We'll do like main painting, and then we'll do a little bit of a glazing. So hopefully you'll find that interesting. So catch you in the next video guys. You take care.